Cleanthony House Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new Quelle Chris album. Being You is great. I wish I could be you more often. Quelle Chris is one of Detroit's true weirdos. He's back with a new album following up one of his shortest and oddest releases yet, Innocent Country, and a little instrumentals album that he put out not too long after that, Lullabies for the Broken Brain. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Chris's music, he's always had a bit of an odd streak, which can make his music a bit of a difficult pill to swallow. I mean, whether you like this guy's music or not, songs like Superfuck and Drug Fest 2002, you just don't forget these songs. Because sometimes Chris writes songs in such a way where you're listening to something that's equal parts alternative hip-hop song and dark comedy sketch. Chris is certainly an acquired taste, to say the least. A lot of his beats consist of very simple loops, very simply structured songs. Lots of obscure loops in these instrumentals too. And as far as his rapping, his flows read more like spoken word a lot of the time than they do rap. And his voice has this really nasal tone to it that throws a heap of cynicism and tongue-in-cheek humor onto his lyrics. And it's so dry. God, is it dry. Like, Chris's music is not very visceral or aggressive. It's very, very heady. It's like watching the most Frasier-iest episode of Frasier, or like one of Adult Swim's early programs that was more fascinated with entertaining itself than it was anybody that was actually watching it. And if you're not enjoying it, if you don't get it, the joke's on you. And while Being You, in some respects, is Quelle Chris's usual, I do think this is his most difficult and most ambitious album yet, because you have well over an hour of material on this thing, and Chris's eccentric tendencies continue to drive him to make songs that are really standoffish and emotionally complicated, like the weird mantra-like repetitions on the song, "In case I lost myself in the crowd, in case I lost myself in the crowd, in case I lost myself in the crowd," or the full 1 minute of Quelle Chris pretty much saying, "I let my heart go, I let my heart go," at the very end of the song Popeye. It's like trying to have a frustrating conversation with someone who refuses to make eye contact and only responds in one-word replies. And sometimes the hooks on these tracks can be kind of unengaging or not that well organized, so they leave the verses feeling unemphasized. And this happens even when the verses are good, even when there are elements of these tracks that I like. In the case of Popeye, I just am enamored with just how beautifully sad and downtrodden that song is. And while the mood of this album is difficult, there is something about it that is just so intriguing. I can't kind of take my ears off of it. I can't quite put my finger on it. There was a tension within me while I was listening to this record, kind of like I was listening to a really obtuse Captain Beefheart album, but instead of really complicated, free, out-of-control instrumentation, we're talking complicated, free, out-of-control emotions. And that's what makes this album kind of a tough chew. Rather than Chris just merely rapping about having an existential crisis, on the song Birthdays, he sounds like he's smack dab in the middle of one, which in a way makes it kind of a weaker song because the performance is kind of off, but then again, it's so emotionally potent, it's like a piece of performance art or something. But a lot of the time though, Chris does make this album pretty easy to listen to for at least an alternative rap fan, with a strong subject matter and a really great sense of humor, like on the song Buddies, which kicks the album off, which is a song about self-love, and he's basically just spitting on this song about being his own best friend and taking himself out to dinner. And the song Dreamer in the Den of Wolves, which has the most vibrant and bombastic beat on the entire album, with these loud blurting horns and heavy beats, these chorus vocals that are so manic and wild, I can't even begin to explain them. It's just like a bunch of shouts sort of multi-tracked on top of one another, and the track is basically about all of the naysayers kind of turning Chris away from his dreams of being a rapper. This track just has an emotional intensity and an instrumental quality to it that's just insane. This is kind of an energy level that I wish the album approached more often, though I still do find very sparse cuts on the album like Fascinating Grass pretty intriguing, which is a bit of a posse cut featuring Rock Marciano and 87, as well as Big Tone. And even though the song features this really dark, spacey, kind of industrial, very skeletal beat, it's all of these funny and very gritty rhymes that are on top of that instrumental that make it so entertaining. Then there's the awesomely creepy Learn to Love Hate, which kind of finds a middle ground between the subtle and the very aggressive moments on this album, where over a boom bap beat and some really eerie instrumentation, Chris is rapping about like voices in his head, hearing the devil in his head. It's like listening to Madlib write a song about mental illness under his Quasimodo persona. And while I'm mentioning rappers, if you're a fan of MF Doom, Open Mike Eagle, or like some early Danny Brown, I think there's a lot for you to like on this album. A portion of this record does kind of lean on these glazed over jazz rap tracks that if you're not really into Chris's bars and his really soft spoken kind of hey, I'm hiding away in the corner sort of demeanor, these tracks may not really speak to you. But even with a couple of tracks here not really leaving a strong impression on me, this album still has an incredible flow to it. Chris keeps things really engaging and interesting with some cool instrumental switch-ups, surprise verses from the alt-rap elite like Elzai and Jean Grey and Homeboy Sandman. And toward the end of the album, the song It's Great to Be is a reprise of sorts, where we have Chris revisiting the hook from the song Buddies, and in the verses of the song, he kind of touches back down on a lot of the themes of self-esteem and self-perception explored throughout the album. And on the track Encore, which is a bit of a bookend, it's a bit of a closing track for the album, Chris introduces that he's going to be playing a couple more songs, which in my opinion was a really smart way of sort of sneaking in 2 more bonus tracks into the track listing here that might not have made so much sense earlier on the record. All things considered, I think this is Chris's best, most ambitious, biggest, and most epic album. But it's also the most challenging listen I think he's ever pulled together too. So it may not be for everybody, but not necessarily because I think there's some lackluster tracks on here. Really, it's because of, again, the emotional complications of this record, with pretty much every track here just violently ripping out skeletons from the emotional closet that Chris is just rifling through for about an hour on this thing. And while it did take a little while for it to click, not just because of the length, but just because of what this album is about, the tone of the album, there's so many good things going for it. All the introspective and very personal lyrics, pretty focused topics on individual tracks and on the album itself, a range of emotions from incredible despair to hilariously smart humor, quality guests, good production, an interesting flow, track to track to track. I'm feeling a light to decent 8 on this album. If you're an experimental, abstract, or alternative hip-hop fan, highly recommend that you check this thing out. And let's transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't cry. Just get angry in the comments if you're angry. Being you is great. I wish I could be you more often. Links next to my head. Subscribe to the channel too. Official website. Forever.